Well, welcome to Eddy County Extension Office. This is Woods Houghton again, and we did a program a while back on goldenrod and sampling goldenrod, and the Extension Office. I thought I might just go a little bit over who we are and what we do. We are a 1/3 county, 1/3 state, 1/3 federal government, with United States Department of Agriculture and New Mexico State University being our judiciary. The Eddy County Extension Office is located at 1304 West Stevens, which is kind of an odd place to find it when you're looking for it. We're just off Mermod and Olive Street, one block over. And we have a staff here. Right now we only have 2 agents. We have myself in agriculture, and we have Amy Kelly, who's our 4-H agent. And normally we have a home economist, but Miss Charlie Fisher, who did an excellent job for us, has decided to raise her child instead of working, so we let her take that option, and we're in the process of filling that position now. We also have a program assistant for 4-H and home economics, and she even helps me out quite often, and that's Jane Coleman. And then we have a food and nutrition educator who's here working on a grant, and her name's Tina Tiller, and Tina does an excellent job as well, liked by the people. And then we have a receptionist who's Robin Kincaid, who will be the first person you talk to. And then we also have a program administrator who is Lori Hill, who keeps all of our books and all the regulations and stuff. And as we were talking about before, we were talking about in goldenrod and the fact that goldenrod grows in alkali soils and in desert situations. Well, soils are the basic media that everything grows in, and so farmers and homeowners alike need to do soil sampling and know how to sample. It will save you money and resources, and save you in your fertilizers. And one of the things that some people don't realize, if you take and imagine a old barrel or a bucket with holes drilled in it at different heights, you will only produce whatever your minimum is. So if your limiting factor is iron, you only produce as much as you have iron for. It doesn't matter how much nitrogen you have. Or if limiting factor is water, that's going to be your limiting factor. So it's called Liedberg's law of the minimum, and it's been around since the 1800s. But it's a principle we still do today. One of the things that is really essential before you start doing a soil sampling is get a soil survey. This was done here a long time ago by the old SCS, which is now NRCS. It was issued in March of 1971. I use this book all the time. It is available online now. You don't have to have a physical book because they quit printing these, but you can get online, go to NRCS soil survey, and it will pull up that and allow you to get to it. But in here is all kinds of good information from on soils, and tells you what the productivity capabilities are, and there's no use putting in for if you want to produce 8 tons of alfalfa when your soil has a maximum capability of producing 6. So that's where I start from. That helps me get started. And we'll go out now and I'll just show you how to do some soil samples and how to process those and what you need to do. And then we'll come back and we'll sit down with the soil sample and show a little bit about how it works and how to read one once you get it. Because everybody sends them off and then they come back to me and say, what does this mean? So we'll talk a little bit about that too. So let me get my hat and my soil probe and a little bit of other things, and we'll take off. Anybody have an empty bucket? I hope. Can I borrow that orange thing?
Oh yeah, you can borrow my orange thing. I have my presents for my kids.
It's January, and this is really the best time to take soil samples because the soil is usually dry. You don't have a lot of moisture in it, and everything that's growing, it's not going to change very much because you don't have anything growing in it right now because it's all dormant. And so this is really the best time. Anywhere from November to March is really the best time to take your soil samples to compare year to year. We're gonna go down and do a homeowner, and then we'll go out and do a pecan orchard and an alfalfa field. Talk a little bit about the difference. There's not a lot of difference in sampling, but the first one thing is you want to sample each area that you're going to manage differently as a different sample. We'll take a lot of sub-samples, but we'll send off those samples to the lab based on management criteria. So if you're not going to manage a field differently or one part of your lawn differently than the rest, there's no point in sending off two samples. We'll just mix those together, those subsamples together, and send off one sample. You know, all of our soils here are a little bit different because it's an alluvial soil base. All the soil is eroded off the mountains, and it flows down here over a period of millions of years, and then it's picked up but the river also meandered around and deposited soil. So it's really unique in that you can have a deposit of calcium carbonate on one part of your yard, and just 10 feet away you may not. So you'll see iron deficiency and the problems of that in just one part of the yard, and you won't see it in the rest of it. Or in farm fields, we'll see there'll be a set of gravel that will go through there that was deposited when the river was running low or running high, and there's a lot was carrying big material, and that gravel will be deposited, and it drains differently than the rest of the field. So you'll see a field where the alfalfa will go, and then it'll drop down a little bit and come back up, and that's where that gravel bed was that was dropped off by the river. So alluvial soils are always interesting in that, which means river-based soils, because you got deposits over eons of time in different places. And so the only way to get around that is take lots of subsamples, mix them all together, and treat for the average when you do your fertilizations. And you know, fertilizers are expensive, but that's just as important as the fact that they're expensive and trying to save you some money. Putting too much of one type of fertilizer when you don't need it, that's not the limiting factor for your crop or your yard or whatever, adds that nutrient to runoff and to the environment when we don't need to. So if you have lots of nitrogen but you need a little bit of potassium or phosphorus, just fertilize with what you need, the potassium and phosphorus. You don't need to fertilize with the nitrogen if that's what you have in your soils. So that's one of the things why, for environmental stewardship and for farmers, it can save them thousands of dollars, if not, and still produce a good quality, high value crop. Pecos River, and since we've put dams in at the turn of the century, it doesn't meander around and jump out of its banks and flow like it used to. When Pecos River actually would flow anywhere 8 miles on either side of it, of where it's at now. It can fly, you know, at different times. We know it flowed all the way out here past canal where it starts to go up, and all the way on the other side up as high as Standpipe. So we're going to use is a basic soil probe, but you can do this with a shovel or anything just to get the right amount of soil. The soil probe's a little easier. I've got an attachment I hope I don't need to use at the hand. Right there. One of the things they don't teach you in school and whatnot, it's a lot easier to get a soil sample out if you'll just take a little WD-40 and spray it on your soil probe. We're not sampling for oil or petroleum products. We're sampling for nutrients, so it won't make any difference. And what you want to do is you want to go down about that far, and you can see We got a pretty good little sample there. There's some roots. When I first sampled this soil, we had no roots growing down that far. His roots were all up at the top, and now we're getting roots down in the soil. Good moisture on it for this time of year. And then we just break that soil up. And put it in our bucket there. And then we just randomly sample. You can go across the yard. And you just don't want to concentrate in good places or bad places. The one thing you don't want to hit is water lines, so kind of know where your water lines are. And you just push it down again. Pull it back up. See, we got a good sandy soil. That's all one deal. But you see the organic matter up here, this dark place, that's organic matter. And it's starting to migrate down in the soil. When we started this, there's no organic matter at all. And so we're starting to get some organic matter going down in the soil. Have to do this a number of times. There's no good rule of thumb. It's just you want to get about a pint of soil for each sample. Oh, there's. See, we're pulling another subsample. The owner's here, so let's go over and talk to him for just a second. And he can tell you a few of the benefits that he's seen since we started sampling his lawn. So, hello,
How are
Dick.
you?
Welcome to our program here on Channel 23. And I'm showing them how to take soil samples, and I thought you might want to tell them a little bit about what you've seen different since we started doing this, what, 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, it's been 3 years at least, I know. And Woods, you started over here taking samples of this, and then you started telling me and bringing me some fertilizer to put on here, and I followed his instructions real close, and it's just made all the difference in the world in this lawn. I mean, it's the lawn I thought looked really good last year. And I think that the surface out here now it's obvious it looks good now.
Yeah.
Woods and
We don't see as many weeds as we had
no,
before.
not nearly as many weeds, and the cover is a lot better, and the lawn just looks a whole lot better, looks more healthy.
And part of that, we also changed some of your, because of the soil, we changed some of your irrigation.
Yes.
And we cut back on a little bit on your water.
Yeah, I'm not watering near as much as I did.
And,
And that makes it a heck of a lot cheaper too.
yeah, and we're putting out the right fertilizer for
Yes.
what's missing in the soil.
Is that soil pretty moist now?
That's moist. That's just perfect. Really.
So I don't need to be watering right away then. I
No.
haven't watered it's been about 3 weeks since I watered it, and I just watered it one time overnight. So
Yeah, you just need this time of year just water about once a month.
it sure does. The whole yard just looks a whole lot better, and it looks really nice. And summertime looks real good too. So
And that's
I recommend this guy. I think he knows what he's doing.
so, I appreciate that.
All right,
I appreciate you stopping and visiting with us, and I'll finish getting some sub samples and get this mailed off, and I'll let you know what the results are.
Thanks, Woods, and I appreciate what you're doing too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, this gets kind of boring because you're just doing the same thing over and over, but as you can tell right here, we just hit a little bit of a rock layer, and that's part of that alluvial soils I was telling you about. There's some calcium carbonate down there in the bottom. But overall, and you just, like I said, don't want to concentrate in one good spot, and you want to get the good spots and the bad spots. Lawns are a little different than what you see in fields because we're growing 2 crops here. We're growing the oak trees and the lawn. And if you have different types of trees, a lawn and pecan trees, or a lawn and a pine tree, you actually got 2 crops. So you got to meet the nutrient requirements around that tree and the root zone of that tree different from what the lawn is. But I usually don't sample that separately. I just interpret what I do around those trees from the original soil sample. When you send it off, you can get one with recommendations or without recommendations. I always get the recommendations so I can disagree with whoever gave them. But and I always recommend, you know, there's different labs. I use New Mexico State University's lab, not just because I'm an employee of theirs, but its lab is for New Mexico soils. They use the extraction techniques that are similar to here. And if you use other labs, like for phosphorus, they may use Brave phosphorus or they may use bicarbonate phosphorus extraction. New Mexico State uses just water phosphorus because that's what it's going to be that frees that up in the soil for the plant to use. And so the different labs will give you different values. So one of the recommendations, whatever lab you start with, stay with that lab and sample with that lab every year or every 5 years. We've been doing this one every year, but now that we've got it stabilized, we're only going to sample this one about every 5 years from now on because we got it up to where we want it. And we'll just check and make sure. And on alfalfa fields and farm fields, I do the same thing. About every 5 to 6 years, I'll sample it, look at the fertilizer records, and see if we're going the right direction, see if we need to make some changes with the producer. So, okay. As we look at this grass, this turf, this is not Bermuda grass. This turf here is buffalo grass. It's comes from Texas A&M. It's what they call turfalo, the variety that he planted. I can give Dick a hard time because he's an alumni of Texas A&M. It doesn't really matter which variety of buffalo grass you use, but buffalo grass does very well here. And as you can see here, if you water it well and you fertilize it right, it makes an excellent turf, and it uses less water than Bermuda or other grasses. And I really like buffalo grass. Our turf grass specialist at New Mexico State's doesn't really like it as much. I got it at my house. I got 10,000 square feet of buffalo grass, and it's the only grass I've ever put under the swing sets that the kids didn't do away with. You know, and so I find it a very resilient, very high quality turf if you fertilize it and take care of it. If you don't fertilize it, if you don't give it the nutrients it needs, it'll bunch up and become very bunchy and not be as quality, but that's true with all turfs. These are red oak trees, and they typically grow in a small grove like this of 3 or 4 or 5 trees real close together. So that's the way you want to plant them when you plant them, because that's the normal native way that oak trees grow. Just 4 years ago, this was an alfalfa field, and before that it was a cotton field. And be honest with you, looking at the first soil samples, I think the farmer knew he was going to sell this farm, and he used up all the nutrients before it became a home. Also, in the process of construction, tearing up the soil, leveling out the soil, you mix that soil up and you bring a lot of soil up to the surface that normally wouldn't be there, and so you see a difference. And like I said, we talked about growing different crops. Here we got, you know, the tree, we got cement, we got another, I don't know what kind of tree that is. It looks like an ash. You know, we have the pine trees, and most people want to have an aesthetic yard. They want variety, that they don't want all the same thing. And so there'll be a number of different plants that have different nutrient requirements. An oak tree will show iron deficiency much easier than the ash tree will. And the pines are going to show phosphorus deficiency much easier than the other plants. And so you need to realize that when you're fertilizing, that you may come out here and put around the root zone of this red oak tree, you may put out a different fertilizer or a different mixture of fertilizers than you would underneath the pine trees. And I always start with the base, which is the lawn fertilizer, and then add to that base for the trees on a homeowner. So, you know, it gets kind of complicated, or sometimes it's just difference in amount. I may put out, in one area I may put out, in this small area around this pine tree, I may put out 10 pounds, and under another tree I may put out 15 pounds. So the amounts will change a little bit. And you can see these trees are healthy, and you're getting these sap branching off at the lower level, and that's a sign of a healthy tree. You need to prune those off in the spring. One of the issues with concrete is it's a calcium. It's limestone, and so it's a calcium-based product. And when you first get new cement, a lot of that will run off into your plants, and you'll start seeing calcium-induced deficiencies. In this yard we have 2 grass areas. Make sure you sample both. Don't just sample one. Get them spread out and get a bunch of samples. We took a number of sub-samples, and that's about one good sample right there. And you know, I can't analyze rocks, so if you find a little pebble or rock like that, take that out of the sample. You know, the roots really don't matter one way or the other, but those rocks, when we put it through the soil grinder, are hard on the grinder. So I like to go through and just try to find all the little pebbles. If I find them, let's discard them. And then break up all the clots so that it dries out real nice. And what we'll do before we ship it is we'll spread it out on some newspapers and let it dry out to being air dry. That takes about 24 to 48 hours. And then once it's air dry, there won't be any microorganisms breaking down any nutrients or anything like that. We used to freeze it years ago. We don't do that anymore. Now we just air dry it and ship it. Oh, I always store these in a paper lunch sack. That works fine unless you have a really wet sample. I don't like to put it in plastic sacks because that conserves the moisture and keeps it from drying out so well. So, all right. When we're sampling for, I didn't bring my lunch sack, so I'm going to use an envelope. I usually use a paper sack. And you want about a pint of soil, and then I label that. So because I might do a number of them a day, I'll come over here and put. I want to put the name of the owner. I want to put the date, which today's 5 January 2011, and soil. Location, I'm just going to put home, lawn. And to be honest with you, I usually do this with a pencil because a pencil gets wet, it doesn't bleed away, where ink will, but that's what I got in my pocket today. So, oh, and the person who collected it, which is me, so I know I did it, and I just put my name down. All right, and now we'll go to our next site for the day. Like I said, you don't need a fancy soil probe. You can do that with a regular shovel. You can use all kinds of things. What matters is you get about, on a lawn you want to go 12 to 13 inches, maybe a little bit deeper, up to 16 inches. On an orchard, a pecan orchard, we're going to go a little bit shorter than that. We're only going to go about 10 inches, 8 to 10 inches, and that's because that's where all the feeder roots are on a pecan, and that's where most of the nutrients are going to come from on the pecan tree. Grass roots will go 6-8 feet deep. Pecan trees, their roots typically are right up in the top 2 feet of the soil. So, all right. Make sure we didn't miss anything behind. can see a few mustards, but it's where the water's accumulated on the side of a road or where it got irrigated late in the season, you know, and so you will see a few of those, you know. Alfalfa fields we sample a lot like a lawn. It's very similar because those roots will go 6-10 feet deep. And what I always tell our producers is we want to sample that right before you put the seed down, and so we know what nutrients are there, and then we want to, if we can, we want to put the fertilizer down and lightly till it into the soil so that it's where the plants can use it. And then we'll sample on a typical farm. I sample about every 5 to 8 years. On some farms that are really trying to get their nutrient management program, or have had problems with nutrient management, you'll sample those every year and graft them, and graft the production, and graft how much fertilizer. Sometimes you start on some of these fields that have been depleted for a long period of time, and the expense of the fertilizer is so high that you just have to do the best you can to build that up over a period of time. You can't do it overnight for a couple of reasons. One is all fertilizers are salts, and if you try to do it too fast, you're going to build up the salt load in the plant, and you're going to starve it for moisture even though there's plenty of water. And the other reason is that it just can't afford it. You know, and fertilizer prices are going, I think, are tightly tied to some other things and whatnot. So here's a typical pecan orchard. This orchard's was established about 22 years ago. It's been well maintained, well pruned. You know, it's a well managed orchard. And so we'll try this here, and wrong side. We'll go out here to this orchard. Like I said, pecan orchards, your sampling techniques are basically the same, but your analysis will be a lot different because you're looking for nutrients that are important to pecan trees than they are for alfalfa or for a lawn. And so we'll want to have micronutrient sample on a pecan orchard because micronutrients play a very important role in how well pecans produce. And we haven't really gone over that concept. There's macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or potash. And the micronutrients, there's 16 essential nutrients, include molybdenum, nickel, magnesium, and I used to be able to name them all, but and the ones I really paid important here is boron, magnesium, manganese, and nickel, and iron. Our soils are really deceptive here because they'll show plenty of nutrients, but you got so much calcium, it ties those nutrients up or holds them so that the plant can't get them, and you'll see deficiency on the plants. Then you just have to work with that. Also with pecan orchards, and we'll show again about mid-July, we'll do another program. We'll talk about how to take leaf samples off of pecan trees, because that's really important to get a good feel on pecan trees of what your nutrients are doing and what your fertilizer is doing, is to see how much actually ends up in the plant. And we'll show you how to pull those leaf samples and how to take care of them so that you can send them into the lab, and we'll get those leaf samples back in the pecan orchards. Because of the high value of that crop and the intense management of that crop, we do that every year. I may not soil sample every year because it doesn't change very often, but we'll always leaf sample every year on every orchard. So. I usually walk down and around instead of going through here, but let's just do that. One of the things, you know, I get questioned all the time is pecan leaves, are they good for composting and mulching? And yeah, they're excellent. They work really well for composting and mulching. A lot of the publications that come out of Georgia and east of Dallas will tell you not to do that because of the acidity of the leaves and the shells. But you know, on our alkali soil, we'll take all the acid we can get. That's what we ought to do, a program on gopher trouble. You know, deer, it's kind of interesting. Just one of the things we don't think about farmers supplying is it's habitat for wildlife, and these are deer tracks right here in La Huerta, and in this orchard, and the deer have been in here and probably ate some of the pecans that fell on the ground, and that the producer here helped feed that deer herd. And sometimes we forget about that. So. Now, this time of year, I didn't bring my slide hammer, but typically for pecan trees, we don't want to sample right up next to the trunk of the tree. We don't want to sample right here because that's not where the roots are that are supplying the nutrients for that tree. The roots are out here on the drip line. And if you think about it raining, and if it would rain, those leaves would shed moisture, and there's an area about this wide that is called the drip line. And God wasn't stupid when he built trees, because that's where the moisture concentrates. That's where he also concentrates the feeder roots and give the nutrients for the plant. So, and this is typical this time of year. And we pull that sample up and we treat it just like we did the other one, but you can see this sample is much drier because this field has not been watered and we haven't had any natural rainfall in a long time, but it's still a same sandy soil, and you can see a little bit of moisture right there, the moisture line. You know, that moisture was down there 9 inches or so, and so there's still some moisture there, but if we don't get any rain pretty soon, it'd be nice to put some water on this field. Not always possible. And what you do is on an orchard like this, just like the home, you don't want to sample just in one place. We're going to walk all the way down that end of the field, all the way over that end of the field, and try to make a big X through the field and do our sampling that way. But we're not going to make you watch all that. Again, we look, so see the moisture line right there, and that's real typical moisture line. And so we're about, we can see it's real dry up here at the top and gets a little bit moisture right here, and we see 2 distinct moisture fields in that orchard. So. Okey-doke. Well, let's go over and we'll show you some different soils. All right. It's a typical pecan tree, and this one's probably about 22 years old, as I said. And a good pecan tree this size and age will produce about 300 pounds of nuts per acre when it's properly fertilized, properly watered, and properly pruned. Homeowners usually don't prune a tree for production. They prune a tree because they want it to be a lot of shade, they want aesthetics. But a producer is going to prune that tree for production, which means he'll take it a lot more off than most homeowners will. And we look at the buds on a pecan tree, and a pecan tree is really unique in its budding. And we can see here, this let me get my knife pointer out here. This scar right here is where the leaf was last year, and this is the bud for this year's leaf. And usually, and you can see it on this bud right here, right underneath there, it's real small, is a bud for next year. So at any one time, you usually will see 2 to 3 years worth of buds on a pecan tree. So they can lose their leaves, unlike other trees, and regenerate itself after a freeze or other damage. And typically this out here, you'll see that that's dried out, that part's dead, and you just want to cut that off on a homeowner and get rid of that. But in this space between this bud and this bud, that's called a node, and that's called a node, and this space is called internode. And depending on the fertility and how well that tree is growing, the faster it's growing and the better fertilizer it has, the longer that internode will be. If they're real close together, that's an indication that it's not growing very well. It either has not enough water or not enough nutrients or something else. But if you spaces out there, you want it to be about 3 to 4 inches between each node, and that's an indication that it's a healthy tree. On the accumulators reports of how many nuts they buy to accumulate from homeowners, we probably have more trees in backyards than we have in orchards. And so I always kid with our pecan specialist. I tell them we have a pecan orchard just with houses sprinkled in it for Carlsbad. Okay, we've been in La Huerta, which is really not a typical soil for most of Eddy County because it's a real sandy soil. It's a late alluvial soil, which means it was laid down recently as far as geologic time is concerned. And it's because it's a young soil, the particles are bigger, which makes it a sand. The only difference between sand and clay is the size of the particle. And so we're going to go down to south of town and get into a little bit more typical soil, which is Reagan loam soil, and we'll sample down there and just show you some of the differences in that soil. The Reagan loams hold water better, longer. It's a more mature soil as far as geologic time is concerned, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and also do a little bit of sampling in an alfalfa field. So with that, we're headed south. Now we're down in Otis, and Otis is a little bit different soil. It's a lot heavier soil. It doesn't need as much water to grow things as La Huerta does as often. You can water less often because the soil holding capacity of this soil is much better. And I'm going to make a turn here and go up to one of Gary fields that we've been working with. You know, it's one of the unique things about Eddy County is the diversity that we have here in our agriculture, because we have within a few areas we got alfalfa, cotton, corn, pecans, all growing real close to each other, and that diversity is good because it keeps the insect populations and everything else working, and we have more beneficial insects than anywhere else I've ever been. You go to Iowa, you go to South Dakota, where it's acre upon acre of corn or acre upon acre of wheat. You don't see the beneficial insects that we have here, and it's just really makes this part of the world a fascinating place to be at. We are encroaching on agricultural lands as the urban sprawl begins. We start spreading out. Everybody wants their little bit of urban sprawl. These are all new pecan trees that were planted last year. planting a bunch more this year. Pecan's a growing crop in Denny County. And that's just this is alfalfa in the middle of a pecan orchard. The farmers kept it that way on purpose so that he has beneficial insects to help control aphids and other problems on pecans. And so as we learn more about some of these things, we're changing our agricultural practices. It's always changing. And that's what Extension Service is here for, is to try to bring these innovations and teach some of this stuff as we learn it as time goes by. So I'm going to get a little bit different tool here. Well, maybe I'm going to get a little bit different tool. Let's just go over to this side. And because the ground hasn't been irrigated, I happen to know this is hard ground. Wait before I start. Get my slide hammer. One of these, I got a number of producers now that are buying their own because they've used this one and they like it. But this little sampling tool costs almost $200. And we do lend it out to people. We do require a $20 deposit. But again, the thing they don't teach you in school is the WD-40. When I learned that, that's one of the neatest tricks I ever learned. See that soil is pretty hard. And on alfalfa, we want to go about that deep. Now usually I tell people take measuring tape and measure on the spindle where they're at. I've used this enough, I know about how deep things are. Now the hard part, getting that back out without losing the soil sample. We lost it all. So we'll run it back down, try to get it out. It's just, I hate to say it. See that down there? It's at the bottom. That's pure calcium carbonate. And if we put an acid on there like vinegar, it just bubble. And that ties up a lot of new micronutrients. And that's just where, when this was an ocean, it got deposited, and it's been moved around by, limestone's been moved around by water and the river. That's where it got deposited. But we're not going to do a lot of sampling here because it's hard. We'll just wait a little bit. Maybe we'll get some rain and soften this up a little bit. Okay? That's one of the problems you run into sometimes. head back to the office, and what we'll do is we'll spread this soil out on a piece of newspaper, let it air dry for 48 hours, and then we'll package it up and send it to fill out the forms and send it to the soil lab for analysis. And when that analysis comes back, we'll do another program and read the analysis and tell you what it says. So we hope that you'll join us in the future. And if you have any questions, come by the extension office. We'll do our best to help you, even if it's not in our field of expertise. We've been known to help people on all kinds of things, so that's what we're here for. And we hope you have a good and prosperous new year. And we just hope Eddy County has a prosperous new year as well. And as we go forward.